Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of r/ProRevenge. My name's Ryan, the official host here at Reddit Voice, and I look forward to bringing you guys today's video. Before I do though, I'd just really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to stay up to date on all the latest videos. Make me look bad on the job? Well, we'll see about that. I worked at a clothing store in a mall for a year and a half. It was not fun. But I was thinking back to my time there recently and forgot this golden gem of ProRevenge. So a new girl had just been hired, as many new people did in that job, and right away you could tell she thought she was hot shit. We're talking acting like a manager, talking how many hours she had, and worst of all, she wouldn't shut up about all the dudes she was banging and how the money she got from them was the most important part. To put it lightly, she was a cold-hearted bitch who made everyone feel bad about their insignificant lives, as she put it. Here's where things go down. In our store, all the racks were milled steel bars and hooks, so really hard to break and really expensive. They could, however, be bent out of shape if enough heavy coats stay on them for long periods of time. Mrs. Hotshit here thought it would be a good idea to impress the management by putting all the coats on the same rack using the milled steel bars instead of putting a circular rack that wouldn't warp. I protested, of course, as I'd been there longer, but she said, "I get paid more than you do, so do what I say." She got hired as a key holder out of the gate, so she made $1 more than I did per hour. I go along with it and put the heavy winter coats up on the steel mill and go about my life. Well, 2 weeks later, the milled steel is of course warped, and when management saw this, they flipped. Cheapo store, any cost was bad to them. Anyways, she blames it on me and I get written up for it. Now I refused to sign, so they say they give me less hours, which also cuts my pay. Because she lied, I was now making half of what I did before, and had a formal written complaint against me. To say I was ticked off wouldn't even start. So I devised a plan to get back at her. You see, the drywall on the center pillars had sustained water damage for an early melt earlier that year, making them extremely soft. However, they did provide some of the largest coverage of shelf space in the entire store, meaning basically a good 20% of shelf space couldn't be used. Now the kicker is Miss Hotshit didn't know about this, as she came in a week after it had happened. And to the naked eye, you wouldn't think the pillar couldn't be used, as there was banners on it to try and hide the yellowing. I may have suggested what a waste not being able to have product on the pillars was, and how if someone could come up with a nice display it would bring in a lot of customers due to how people could see it from the main mall floor. We were just off the food court, and her eyes lit up. Now here's the thing, I was taking a small break to a nice snowy lake cabin the next day, and the people she had working with her were the manager or the temps who were not allowed to handle marketing and logistics, i.e. putting shelves/rack up on the wall due to their costs and the incident that got me wrote up. Now I knew she wouldn't want the managers to see it because she wanted all the glory from it. She wanted to show to our 3 stores in the mall that her store was the best while the managers weren't around. So, she being with a temp and them not being able to put up shelving and the heavy winter clothing on milled steel racks attached to the soft drywall pillars, within a week the drywall on the pillars collapsed and ruined $500 worth of product. Now, she tried to shift blame on me, but I was away for the whole week, so it couldn't have been me, because obviously that can't happen if I'm in the forest hundreds of miles from civilization. So no dice. She promptly got charged with the repair, was demoted to sales associate, and was written up for what they finally realized was not just this, but the one they wanted me to sign. The repair was $2,500 plus the $500 stock that got destroyed when 40 pounds of drywall came crushing down on it. But I wasn't done yet. You see, our manager was in our store specifically, was pretty chill, and she's still a personal friend of mine. She had a group chat so we could talk off hours and keep up to date. Now, as I mentioned before, she wouldn't shut up about all of the men she was playing and how the only thing that mattered was the money. And oh boy, did she use the group chat to say a lot of this. Sometimes one of these dudes would come around and take her for lunch. Let's just say when she was in the back for a little while finishing something up that I let them see the text channel if they promised not to let her know that I told them. So often, they'd go on their lunch date, and after 1 or 2 days, she'd be down a man. Finally, this boiled over when one of them took her phone, saw how many guys she had been banging for money, and messaged all of them about how much of a lying cheat she was. After 2 months, her fountain of man money dried up, and how demoted to a sales associate, she didn't have the money to spend on all her lavish nights out or designer clothing. She eventually moved up to another store for more hours and stole money from that, till causing her to get fired. A fitting end to a backstabbing ice queen, I think. I eventually left that job after half a year later to pursue my current job. TLDR, bitchy coworker blames me for a task she commended me to do, so I set her up to fail, cost her $3,000, ruined her relationships she's having with 10 different men. She then steals from the company and gets fired. Edit to clear things up. To those saying that charging an employee for repairs is illegal, 100%. However, she decided to instead take a pay cut until it was paid back and keep her job rather than be fired. Minimum wage here is $15 an hour, and she took the cut down to approximately $12 in order to pay it back. Also, this company is super sketch and will do anything not to pay for their mistakes, even going so far as to leave a hole in the roof. There for 10 months before fixing it, making so during spring that nothing could be put there. Boyfriend cheats on me with my step-sibling, so I get him kicked out and destroyed his relationship with his parents. Hello Reddit people, I've been wanting to post my story on here for absolutely ages, but I just never got around to doing it. So then I figured, since I have a Reddit account now, I might as well post it. When I was around 17, I started dating a guy 19, I'll call him Jake, for the sake of the post. Also, age of consent where I live is 16, so nothing illegal happened here. We got on well, spent a lot of time together, and cared for each other a lot. We even started talking about living together once we both moved out. We were a perfectly happy couple, or so I thought. You see, after we'd been dating for a few months, something in Jake changed. He was getting a lot more distant. Whenever he was with me, he'd be checking his phone constantly. We stopped spending as much time together, and he started to get really funny about public affection, regarding things like hand-holding and stuff. He also seemed to start caring less and less about my feelings. I used to have a bit of a thing for humiliation in the bedroom. Nothing too far, and we'd spoken about what Jake should and shouldn't say, but he started to get more and more degrading. He'd tell me how no one would ever love me and would pick on my insecurities. I actually broke down crying a few times when this happened. To give him a bit of credit, the first few times he did stop everything he was doing and apologize/cuddle with me until I felt better. But eventually that stopped too, and he just began rolling his eyes and telling me to grow up. He was like a completely different person. The insults started to seep into our everyday life. He'd pick on my appearance a lot, bring up my family because I was dealing with a lot of family issues at the time, bring up the fact that I slept around before we started dating, a sort of rebellion caused by the family issues, etc. If I got upset by it, he'd just leave the room and let me cry by myself. I started to feel like it was my fault our relationship was falling apart. Maybe I wasn't good enough for him. I knew deep down that he was cheating on me, and this was confirmed when I got a message from a guy, David, on Facebook, telling me that he'd been sleeping with Jake. He apologized profusely and told me that he broke things off with Jake as soon as he found out that he had a boyfriend. I couldn't be mad at David, it wasn't his fault. We spoke for hours and I reassured David that it wasn't his fault and that he had done nothing wrong. David also helped me to stop making excuses for Jake's attitude and the way he'd been acting. He was a godsend. The thing that truly broke me happened not too long after the cheating was discovered. We'd been arguing a hell of a lot more. Then he decided to do something absolutely unforgivable. You see, I had a stained relationship with my father for years. He'd cheat on my mother constantly, and eventually he settled down and had kids with a girl he'd been seeing behind her back. He did try to have some sort of relationship with me until I was about 13 or 14 and decided he didn't love me as much as his other kids, and we stopped any and all contact. It broke me and still hurts to think about to this day. Anyway, Jake went out of his way to find one of my step-siblings online and sleep with them. He bragged about it the next day, and my step-sibling actually posted online what had happened, and I received a bunch of messages from their friends telling me how I deserved it. This was probably the lowest point in my life, and I hated myself, partly for allowing it to happen, and partly because I had started to believe what they were saying. My only solace during this time was David. I didn't want to burden my friends with my problems, and David was one of the people who knew firsthand what Jake was like. We spoke for a few weeks, and eventually talk turned to revenge. I had tried calling things off a couple of months prior due to Jake's awful behavior, but he started with the apologies and told me he didn't mean it. He'd never do it again. He even spoke to some of my family members who unknowingly pressured me to get back together with him as we were such a sweet couple. I hadn't wanted to tell him the real reason we'd broken up, so I kept the details pretty vague, though I'm pretty sure some of them had seen my step-sibling's post and knew why I didn't want to be with him. After weeks of talking and planning, I finally had enough and decided to do something about it. My father wasn't exactly a rich man, but he worked a pretty well-paying job and earned enough money to live fairly comfortably. He had begun spreading rumors around when I was younger, during a custody battle with my mother, that he had set up a trust fund for me and that there was enough money for me to get me set up in my own place when I was 18, plus a bit extra. I knew that this was absolute bullshit. He tried to get out of paying child support all the time. Of course he'd never set up a trust fund for me. However, Jake did not believe me. We'd never spoken about it a lot, but he heard the rumors, and I'd just always say what I told you folks. My father was an appalling parent who grudged paying my mother child support, so why the hell would he set up a trust fund? But Jake wouldn't listen. He even did his own research into the type of job my father worked and came up with an estimate of how much he thought my father was earning, though to his credit, he did drop the subject whenever I asked him to. For a while anyways. I decided to use this to my advantage. Jake and I were still dating, though I avoided him at any chance I got, until one night where I sat him down and told him that since I'd be turning 18 in a couple of weeks, I'd started thinking about us getting our own place, with the trust fund my father had set up for me. He immediately cheered up at this, and honestly, I think that night was the first time in months he'd said anything nice to me when we weren't in public or with friends or family. This very nearly made me want to call the whole thing off, but I spoke with David later that night and he reminded me that Jake would go back to his usual degrading attitude in no time. We started looking at flats, though Jake was kind enough to let me have the final say and handle the paperwork, because how could he possibly go out and cheat on me if I had to sort out the paperwork for a flat? I was a little surprised by this, to be very honest, as I'd always thought he'd want his name on the paperwork and everything, so I couldn't kick him out. By this point, he'd slept with my step-sibling, degraded me, smashed my self-confidence to pieces, and cheated on me regularly. I think by now, he thought that I wouldn't kick him out no matter what he did. Anyways, I started taking up extra shifts at work to try and save enough money to actually move out. Not with Jake though. Oh no, I was moving in with my friend Emma. We had both been thinking about moving out for a while anyways, and though, why not just be roommates? We found a cute little one-bedroom flat that was close to our college and work, and started getting stuff sorted to move in. I also didn't want to bring any trouble to my mother's door if Jake started kicking up a fuss. Emma had no issues with clawing the face off him if need be, and told me not to worry about him coming to our front door. Then came the next part of the plan. I waited till a week or so before Jake and I were supposedly moving into our own flat, and stole his phone for a few minutes. He'd stopped caring about leaving his phone unattended and would sometimes flat out brag about how lucky he was to be able to sleep with whoever he wanted and come home to a little bitch who would make him dinner. So that day, when he went for a shower, he wasn't all too bothered about taking his phone with him. Perfect. I went onto his phone, deleted my number from his contacts, and changed the name of his MM's contact to mine. Pleased, I went into the kitchen, smashed one of the plates. It was my mother's, but it was a cheap one from a local shop, and I did replace it as soon as possible, and I left for work once everything was done. My mother had left for work a couple hours prior, so she was safe. I just needed a reason to get him pissed off, and oh boy, did he get pissed off. His first reaction was to text me, calling me all the disgusting names under the sun. Except it wasn't me he texted, it was his mom. I'd texted her in advance and told her I hoped she'd forgive me, but she had to see what her son was really like. She never tried to defend him as much, as she just hadn't quite known how bad his behavior was. She actually called him out a couple times where he'd slipped up and been harsh with me when she was there. She went apeshit. I never found out exactly how their argument went, as she phoned him to scream at him and call him out for his shitty behavior, finally seeing how horrible her son was, and it didn't help that she'd been sent screenshots of some of the times where he had admitted to cheating. She was absolutely disgusted by her son's behavior and phoned me to apologize on Jake's behalf. It wasn't her fault though, he's old enough to know how to act like a damn adult. He wound up telling his mom essentially that her opinion didn't matter, as he'd be moving in with me anyways. Needless to say, when he called me on Facebook after I deleted my number from his phone, I took some satisfaction in telling him that we weren't moving in together, and that the trust fund wasn't real. I'd already told him that in the past, he just refused to listen, and that I'd move in with Emma. I was called all the sluts and whores under the sun. His voice sort of turned into white noise after a while. I told him we were over and hung up. Blocked him on everything. He had to run back to his mom and dad, his tail between his legs. And they took him back for a little while, though after a bit the arguments became too much and his parents kicked him out. He stayed with a couple of friends for a few months before he managed to get his own place. His parents, especially his mother, have not been the same with him since. I still talk to his mom on occasion. Lastly, David and I took the liberty of sending screenshots of Jake's abuse to as many of the people he'd been hooking up with as possible. A couple of sleepless nights were spent trying to track people down on Facebook, and part of it was to get back at Jake, but most of it was just to make sure that none of them got roped into a full-on relationship with him and had to deal with all the crap I'd gone through. So there it is, my little story of ProRevenge. I know this is really long, so there's a TLDR below. I wasn't ever planning on posting my story, but I was scrolling through Facebook the other day, and one of Jake's new accounts popped up in the People You May Know section. After talking with Emma about it, she suggested posting it here. I hope it fits in the subreddit. Bye-bye. As for the TLDR here, you guys just heard the entire story as an audio log, so I'm not really sure that the TLDR is necessary. With that being said, my friends, we've reached the end of today's ProRevenge. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like on the video and also subscribe. As always, my name's Ryan, the official host here at Reddit Voice, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.